Now lecture in, her lecture that was picked up by the Church of England. After 26 years in full-time ministry, Judy became the executive director of the Anglican Foundation, and that's where I first met her. She served for over 11 years. I gave away over awarded, I should say, over $6 million to support many good ministries and missions across Canada. She's written a number of academic papers and books, and 2 books for prayers for children, and also a book on generosity for young people, and the most recent one, Prayers in the Pandemic. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome to you the Reverend Canon Dr. Judy Royce, who will engage us for the next 45 minutes or so. Thanks very much, Judy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Can you hear me? Yes? Is it clear? Okay, good. So it's wonderful to be here back in the cathedral and in this diocese. I've been here many times over the years working with the foundation, and it's always been a pleasure to be part of this diocese and certainly at this cathedral. So thank you all for the invitation to be with you, I guess, online, and some of you here in person, to celebrate the 45th anniversary of women's ordination to the priesthood. So what I thought I would do is talk a little bit and then offer you some Q&A. So if there's a question and answer time close to the end, we'll allow for that. So I've been asked to speak about some notable events in Canada that opened the door to priesthood for women. Some of the aches and pains of priesthood, the contributions that women have made as clergy, and then a few thoughts about the future. So I want to begin with a quotation from The Wizard of Oz. This is the story, I'm sure you know, of Dorothy, who follows the yellow brick road to Emerald City in search of the great wizard. And Dorothy wears ruby shoes. She's told she must wear them tightly so that the wicked witch cannot steal them from her, for the shoes are magic and contain power. Now, remember what Dorothy does. She just has to close her eyes, click her heels 3 times, and say the words, "There's no place like home." And then at the end of Dorothy's journey, now what I'm seeing here is not coming up on the screen, so I'm just gonna, there we go. At the end of Dorothy's journey, Glinda, the good witch, tells her, "You had the power all along, my dear." But Dorothy didn't know this. She had to face challenges and struggles and disappointment to realize the truth of Glinda's words. You had the power all along, my dear, and maybe as women, we do too. So I hope that we will claim our power as women, and my central affirmation for this talk is that there's no place like home in the church together, and there's a place for everyone at God's table. So 45 years, it's been quite a remarkable time for us as Canadians. A lot has happened in 45 years. Wonderful moments, heartbreaking moments, holy moments. We've all met extraordinary people. We've endured extra awful people. We've confronted extra perplexing and demanding situations. We've been given amazing appointments. We've been offered enviable opportunities. We've been overlooked for promotions and not considered for cardinal parishes and cathedrals. We've been held up as pioneers and agents for progressive change. We've been admired for our perseverance and persistence. We've been shown off and brushed off and prized as a trophy. We've been criticized for our hair, our voice, our clothing, and even our nail color. The past 45 years have been an amazing time, really, to be a woman. There has been progress, but it has been a hard row to hoe. There have been challenges, conflicts, confrontations, controversies, quarrels, clashes, resistance and opposition, cruel words, and hostile, irrevocable opinions. The past 45 years have not been easy ones for women who lived through them, and they truly create the floor upon which you and I now walk. So what I want to do for the first part of this presentation is just acknowledge some notable women and events without which women in the priesthood may never, ever have been possible. And the first is women's right to vote in Canada. In this year of 2021, we are celebrating over 100 years since women received the right to vote. Now, this was an incredible victory, but it did not allow women to take their place in the Senate and thereby make decisions about public life. Why? Because women were not declared persons. That took another 8 years. Now, this legal victory is important for us because without an identity as a person, a woman could not be considered a candidate for any profession, and certainly not a priest. And so today we remember the persistence of 5 Alberta women, the famous 5 they're called, petitioners in the groundbreaking Persons case. These famous 5 altered Canadian law. They changed the course of history. The achievement of personhood for women was a monumental change. It was a historic legal victory, and by 1930, Canada finally had its first woman senator. So you'll see here, those 5 women asked the Supreme Court of Canada, does the word persons include female persons? And Canada's Supreme Court said no. It's hard to believe it wasn't that long ago that a woman was not considered a person by the Supreme Court. So the second pivotal moment was in the 1970s. The Canadian Human Rights Act came into effect, eliminating gender discrimination and ensuring equal pay for equal work. By 1967, the Royal Commission on the Status of Women was established with 167 recommendations on employment, educational opportunities, and family law, and also established was the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, which then led to another groundbreaking decision for women in Canada in the 1980s, abortion, a woman's right to decisions concerning her body. And the Supreme Court ruled that a father had no legal right to veto a woman's abortion decision. Now, I'm noting these events in our history because the ordination of women to the priesthood may well never have even been considered without the tireless efforts of women before us. efforts for an egalitarian, representative, and fair democracy, the Declaration of Personhood, and the rights of women to make decisions concerning her body. The women and the men who have gone before us set the floor upon which we now walk. We truly stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. And it is now possible to have our voices heard in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in operating rooms. We're in the Senate, we're in Parliament, we've been to space, we've swam oceans, we've been deaconesses and deacons, we've been priests and deans and academics and bishops, we've been primates and diocesans, sisters and reverend mothers. And many, though not all, Anglicans throughout the world have embraced the idea that women do have a calling to all forms of sacramental ministry and leadership, both lay and ordained. Now, those journeys to fulfill what we often describe as our calling have often been characterized by struggles and setbacks, determination and disappointment, perseverance and patience, and sometimes success. The road has been a long one for women in Canada, with much to do and still much to change in terms of who stands at altars on Sunday mornings and who wears a mitre at confirmations and ordinations. So, Florence Lee Tim Oy, the ordination of the first Anglican priest in Hong Kong, 77 years ago. The Philadelphia 11, 47 years ago. And 6 Canadian women, 45 years ago. These are the steps on a far longer journey that won't be complete until the church is truly transformed from the inside out, from patriarchy and sexism and heterosexism and racism and all forms of oppression, to incarnate a truly expansive, inclusive, and just gospel that enables people to claim that the Spirit of the Lord is truly upon them. And so we remember all of these women, these amazing, trailblazing, pioneering women, the rabble-rousers and hell-raisers who made impossible dreams come true, the women who served tea and stood on soapboxes, the women who darned and stitched, women who said no and bitched, women who had audacity and women who were fearless, women in dresses and dalmatics, in collars and cassocks, in petticoats and preaching scarves, the journey of so many women in our country evolving toward equality and social justice. So I give you that background because I think it's important that for us in Canada, the right to vote, the declaration of women as persons, women's rights about decisions concerning her body, equal pay for equal work, these were the key moments for Canadian women in the last 100 years. Now, I don't know what your experience is in your ordination journey, but many of us know the strain of that white collar around our neck, the sting and the pain of opposition. But thank God we also know the indomitable spirit of hope. And so I imagine that everyone here online and sitting here in this cathedral who would be the first to say that we did not do it alone. We did it by standing on the shoulders of women who came before us, women who have been shattering glass ceilings for years in business, in politics, in medicine, in the marketplace, and we are truly, truly in their debt. Now, in actual fact, women have been leaders since the beginning of time. And, you know them as well as I do. I'll just name off a few. Miriam and Deborah and Jael and Rahab and Esther. There's Rebecca and Rachel and Ruth and Naomi, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, Esther, Lydia, Prisca, Phoebe, Nympha. From earliest times, women have exercised religious leadership in their home, in their local communities, in monastic life, as reformers, as benefactors, as theologians, and evangelists. And we know, of course, that women were among Jesus' followers, and that women were some of his closest friends and supporters, and they were the ones who remained at the cross when most of the disciples fled for safety, and they were the first to learn of Jesus' resurrection and the first to see the risen Lord. Now, despite all of this scriptural support for the ministry of women, the glass ceiling has been alive and well over the years. And in the church, we call it the stained glass ceiling. And it's that invisible barrier that keeps a given demographic from rising beyond a certain level in the hierarchy. And reasons are often given based on a particular interpretation of Scripture and tradition, and also firmly entrenched in past practices. Now, when the Anglican Church was initially considering the ordination of women, Pope Paul VI wrote to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was then Donald Coggan, in 1975. And the Pope said this: she, referring to the church, she says it is not admissible to ordain women to the priesthood for very fundamental reasons. These include the example recorded in the sacred scriptures of Christ, choosing the apostles only from among the men, the constant practice of the church, which has imitated Christ in choosing only men, and her living teaching, its authority which has constantly held that the exclusion of women from the priesthood is clearly in accordance with God's plan for the church. It's ironic, isn't it, that the church is referred to by popes in feminine terms while denying women admission to the priesthood. So that papal pronouncement in 1975 to the Archbishop of Canterbury was also repeated 1977, 1994, 1995 by subsequent popes. In the year 2000, the Vatican explicitly excluded women from holy orders due to the fact that they are not ontologically equal to men, whatever that means exactly. But I think it means there's something in our makeup that is just, as the Roman Catholic Church said, not ontologically equal. So many women over the years have not been accepted as priests or bishops, not due to suitability or competence or experience or credentials. It's gender. So let's go to Canada, where legislation was passed at 2 general synods, and in 1976, 6 women were ordained as priests in Canada: Patricia Reed in the Diocese of what was then called Caribou, Mary Mills, Diocese of Huron, Mary Lucas and Beverly Shanley, Diocese of Niagara, and then 2 from this diocese ordained right here in this cathedral. There's the pictures of them: Elspeth Alley, she died at 76, and Virginia Bryant, she just died very recently. And in the center there, this one, is Michael Deck. Do any of you know Michael Deck? Okay, he used to be in the Diocese of Toronto. And the bishop actually asked Michael, I talked to Michael a few weeks ago, and the bishop asked Michael if he would be willing to be ordained with these two women as in a historic moment. It was a strategic move to sort of legitimize things, at least have one man there, just to avoid all of the controversy. That's how much of an issue it was that there had to be one man present to make it kind of okay. Now, there's some interesting records about Elspeth Alley. She attended the Atlantic School of Theology. She was treated rather like a dog. She was never allowed in the dining room or the common room, and most days that she attended AST, she had to eat lunch in her car in the parking lot, and she had to sit at the back of all of her classrooms. Now, on the day of her ordination rehearsal here at the cathedral, apparently the power went out. And of course, this was interpreted as a sign that the ordination should not take place. Except that the power came back on the day of the ordination, and I'm told by Michael Deck that the spirit was quite celebratory, and the cathedral was full. And right before the service, people remember the entrance of the pew. Do you know this story? Yes? Isn't it? No. Okay. Excuse me, I got a frog. So apparently the place was full, and there's this story of the liturgy of the pew that the sides people brought forth a pew and put it in the center, so right down here, just to show people that the place was crowded and there needed to be more seating. But there's another account that I read in the archives just not too long ago that said the pew was brought forward and placed backwards so that when you sat on it, you faced the back. And that is for those who wanted to indicate their opposition by turning their back, by being present, but turning their back on the liturgy. So we're not sure if that's apocryphal or it's true. So during the liturgy, when the question was asked if there was any reasonable cause not to proceed, one of the clergy, of course, came forward with his objection, and he read it out loud for all to hear, and the bishop, David Somerville, thanked him, but said that they were acting on the authority of the House of Bishops and the General Synod, and the service would go forward as planned, and the priest took his piece of paper and walked down the center aisle and out the door. It was also the decision that day to choose the Book of Common Prayer ordination rite in order to reduce the number of possible objections. There could be objections as to the validity of the ordination if a trial use rite were used or something more modern than the Book of Common Prayer. So thank God for these women who pursued what they believed to be their vocation, and thank God for bishops and others who stood by them. Elspeth and the other 5 were truly trailblazers with absolutely no role models. And I think of the TV shows we were watching in Canada at the time. Oops. All in the Family, with Archie Bunker, the family's patriarch, and his wife, Edith, sweet and understanding and slightly naive and uneducated and always deferring to her husband. We were also watching at the time Gunsmoke with Matt Dillon and his gorgeous, buxom Miss Kitty as the saloon owner. And we were watching Marcus Welby with his loyal secretary, nurse, and friend, Consuelo. It wasn't until 1980 that we saw the first female news anchor and a female co-host of a major morning show. So the things we were watching on TV were not giving us any any role models. And certainly there weren't a lot of female clergy role models out there either. When I was first ordained, there were only really a few women who were role models, and we had to kind of figure it all out by looking at what other women before us did. So the first 6 women really did have to forge a path and pave the way. And women have been struggling with how to do that ever since. Some insist on being called mother or father. Some always dress in black clericals, whether they're presiding at the altar or shopping in the grocery store. Some prefer to be called by their Christian names and wear whatever seems most appropriate for the occasion. We simply didn't have enough role models in those early days, and the stuff we were watching on TV made marriage and the kids look like the best option. Now, one of the things that I have a lot of colleagues in the business world, and I talk to them about their experience, and one of the common things that my colleagues say that business women do when they get into the corner office or in boardrooms is to dress like men and act like men. Dark, conservative suits, low-heeled shoes, pearl earrings, a watch, maybe a wedding band. They fist punch with their colleagues, and God forbid they admit that they're leaving the office early to pick up kids from school. So many women, not just in our profession, but in other professions, simply conformed to what men did because they didn't have anybody else to look to. And I know lots of women, and they pay a high price to conform, but the upside is, for them, they keep their corner office and are at least on the ticket when a promotion becomes available. But they certainly pay a high price for it. So it's challenging to enter a profession that's dominated by men. I remember when I was the rector of a suburban parish in Toronto, I was presiding at the altar. With me was a young female server. I'd been ordained about 10 years. And just as I finished the Eucharistic prayer and we were filling the chalices with wine, the young female server, she leaned in and whispered to me, she says, "Are you sure you're supposed to be doing this?" Well, many of us also have the experience of parishioners crossing to the other side of the altar when they see a woman administering bread or wine. When I was the vicar at St. James Cathedral in Toronto, there were always the Friday phone calls asking who was presiding and preaching on Sunday, so that if it was me, they could choose to come or not attend. And we had a midweek service in the Lady Chapel on Fridays. There were regularly about 10 people. The presider was always, I'll make up his name, Father Browning. And when he was on vacation, I was the one appointed to take his place for that midweek service. And the altar there was against the wall. And so when I began the BC service of Holy Communion, there were usually about 10 or 12 present. So I recited the opening prayers with my back to the congregation, and then when I turned to face them, they had all left, every one of them. And that happened over the course of 7 years. So I think we've all had these kinds of experiences, and then there's the whole sisterhood thing, female rivalry. Many professional women have made their way by shutting out other women so as not to lose their special place in the world of men. Mary Daly calls women's mutual distrust of each other as horizontal violence. Daly taught at Boston College for over 30 years. She's a radical feminist philosopher, and she argued strongly for women to develop a sense of sisterhood and mutual trust and support. But I don't know about you, but my early resistors and critics, many of them were women my mother's age, women who didn't have the opportunity to study or pursue a career in their day, so women who dedicated themselves to domestic life. And I really get this, my mother was one of them. It's especially difficult for some of those women to accept the new roles younger women were now being given. Think of an assistant curate, a woman, to a male rector. The rector's wife was not always so keen about that her husband was spending every day with another woman. And I remember an Ultra Guild directress once saying to me, "Oh, sure, you get to preside, and me, I set your table and I do your dishes." Now, many of those women had their children in the 1950s, and who were their role models? June Cleaver of Leave It to Beaver. June and Ward Cleaver and Beeve and Wally. You know this show, right? Yeah. They were the idealized suburban family in the mid-20th century, and when the Beeve and Wally came home from school, June was in the kitchen. She was chopping vegetables. She was icing a cake or basting a roast. Her kitchen was her domain, and it was immaculate. And June had that perfectly coiffed hair, tasteful makeup. She had ladylike pastimes like needlepoint and cake decorating, and June was always wearing a string of pearls, even while gardening. And to make things worse, there were religious books that women were reading at the time. Do any of you know this book, The Total Woman? Yeah. If you don't have it, you should get it and read it, just for illumination. The theme of the book is for women to do whatever it takes to please your husband. The author says this: "It is only when a woman surrenders her life to her husband, reveres and worships him, that she becomes truly beautiful to him, a priceless jewel, the glory of femininity, his queen." The author says, if your man treats you like dirt, walks all over you, refuses to appreciate your opinions, then it is your duty as a total woman and as a Christian to live with it and to do it with a smile on your face and a song in your heart. But then around the same time came a TV show called Front Page Challenge, where Ottawa-born Betty Kennedy took her place alongside Fred Davis and Gordon Sinclair and Pierre Burton, a new kind of role model, a woman broadcaster, later to become a senator. So these TV shows and books were part of the popular culture, and so no wonder there was so much confusion in everyone's minds about women, how to be and how to act. And of course, women we see nowadays on TV shows women are in leading roles. They're police sergeants and surgeons and partners in law firms and news anchors and talk show hosts. And in Canada, we've had 8 women as provincial premiers. Of the over 1,000 bishops, 69 are women. 11 of those are Canadian women. Of the 4 metropolitans, 2 are women, and we have a female primate. Of the 32 dioceses in Canada, there are 9 diocesans who are women, 2 suffragans, 1 is retired, 1 is returned to parish ministry, and 5 of them are retired, and there are 3 cathedral deans. So, what's in store for the future? Well, I think based on an enlightened understanding and interpretation of Scripture, which postulates an equality of the sexes and their suitability for diverse forms of ministry, the demonstrable competence, ability, and track record of women in the church, the ongoing understanding of humanity in its diversity, working together toward common goals, all of these things, I believe, will move the church forward as an inclusive body, positive and life-giving ways. And it may sound kind of, well, that's simple enough, but it's not. It's still remains a huge challenge, especially the interpretation of Scripture. So we've broken through the stained glass ceiling in many ways. More women are rectors than ever before. We are leading parish communities all across this country. And I think nowadays, it's less a thing to be a female leader in the church, less raised eyebrows, less suspicion, less taboos, especially as women are taking their rightful place in all kinds of diverse roles in medicine, healthcare, business, law. And I used to find, although it happened just the other day, I thought we were over it, but I used to get, oh, wow, a lady minister. Have you ever had that? Yeah. It's kind of like they look at you like you've got, 10 noses or something. Oh, a lady minister. But I think people are quite surprised, have been quite surprised in the past at that. And I think even still, as I say, I just got that a couple of weeks ago. Oh, a lady minister. So it's still there. You'd never say to Chris, oh, a male dean. It just wouldn't happen. So women are as much a part of the fabric of our lives that it's less and less odd to see women in stereotypical roles. And, Glinda was right. Women are claiming their power and claiming their space. And one of the ways into the future is, I think, to continually uphold women from our past and equally uphold them wherever we can today. So nowadays throughout the world, we hear these phrases: when women are empowered, the whole community flourishes. Unleash a girl's potential, and you change the world. Girls can do anything. We can, and we will. So I'm just going to leave it there for the moment and just give you a chance to have some comments or some Q&A. And I have a couple of stories I'd love to recount to you, but I think I'm just going to stop there for the moment. So I realize those of you online, I won't be able to have your questions, but there are some people right here. Are there any comments or questions that you want to make, your experience?
In the context of a very strong women's
Sure. Well, some of you may know this as well, but there were, so General Synod is every 3 years, and General Synod is every 3 years, so these things have to go through General Synods. But yes, there were all kinds of conversations in parishes, in deaneries, and certainly at the level of General Synod and diocesan synods, there were all kinds of workshops and things talking about whether women should be ordained. So there's a lot of that took place, probably not that dissimilar from the Episcopal Church. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Some of those discussions also happened at the seminaries. I know I was at both Wycliffe and Trinity, and there were lots of those discussions in the academy as well. Yeah, it's a good question. Anybody? Yes? Thank you. Anybody else? I do remember, again, at the cathedral, it was all men when I was there, and Fridays, the men always took Fridays off, so I was kind of in charge on Fridays. And there was a call from a family who wanted last rites, and the man who was dying, he knew he was dying, and wanted last rites. And so, of course, when you get calls like that, as you know, you don't just diddle-daddle and you get there. And so, of course, I went right away, and I arrived at the hospital, and they looked at me and thought, oh. So they said, we'll have to talk to, our dad about this. And I said the dean was not available, and some of the other people were not available, but I was there and I was glad to do it. And they went and had a conversation, came back out of the hospital room and said, Dad says he'd rather die without the blessing of the church than have it from a woman. And he did die. And it's a story that I always remember and think, oh, how very sad. How very sad. A man who'd been a member of the cathedral for a good part of his life. And, you know, as that slide said, it's gender, it's not competence, it wasn't anything else. It was simply gender. I found that very sad, that one. There was one other, I told this to you, Melanie, last night at dinner. During the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, we would have a pulpit exchange. And when I was at rector of a parish, and so Our Lady of Perpetual Help decided that they wanted a woman. And I was the only woman in the ministerial. So I was elected to go to Our Lady of Perpetual Help, and I was saying to Melanie, I went there all dressed, cassock, the whole bit, because I didn't want to have to worry about changing. And so I got into the vestry. This is a big, big downtown Catholic church, and the vestry was, I think the condo I live in is smaller than that vestry, and it had like grand chandeliers and beautiful paintings, and it was just quite a grand vestry. And there were all sorts of people milling about and doing this and that. So I was there, and I said to somebody, and I can't remember who it was, I said, may I, and there were 4 or 5 washrooms in this place. It was big. And I said, may I use the washroom before the liturgy? And there was a bit of kerfuffle around that, so there was conversation. Somebody went to somebody else to see if that was going to be all right. And one of the clergy came to me and he sort of whispered, he said, you want to use the washroom here, I understand. And I said, yes, please, if that's possible. And he said, well, for you, there's a washroom in the basement. So I said, no, it's okay, I'm good. I thought, I am so not going down to the basement. But that's the kind of thing, and there seemed to be no shame around it, just go to the basement, it's fine. So these are, I have a lot of admiration for my women colleagues, because it's not always easy. Actually, it was at that same service when they had news reporters there and everything. There's a woman at a Roman Catholic church preaching, and this man gave me a little piece of paper that he had written down something on. He wouldn't shake my hand. Most of the people there wouldn't shake my hand at the door. But he gave me a little piece of paper. I still have it. This is like 25 years ago, maybe. And it's by Samuel Johnson, who is an English essayist and writer. And Samuel Johnson said, this was 19th century, and he said, a woman preaching is like a dog standing on its hind legs. It's not done well, but it's really, you are surprised to find that it can be done at all. And he handed me that little piece of paper as he left the liturgy. And that was noted on that night's news, because some reporter thought, well, this is great. So, those aren't fun things to live through, but you live through it. Does any of this resonate with your experience, or is it, I don't know what it's like out here, or what your experience has been?
My story is that I can go to the grocery store and literally have someone say, I like your shirt. It makes you look like a priest.
Oh, wow. That's...
No one knows. No one knows who we are. Like, there's just no acknowledgement because that's not what people see on TV still. Like, I've had that conversation so many times. Oh, a lady minister. Which, like, I'm non-binary, so that's already
Right.
You know, everybody sees me as a lady, even though I don't really fully identify that way, but just no one acknowledges that it's even possible, even though I have to tell them over and over, like, it's actually been 45 years that we've been ordained in this church. And I've also, yeah, had, like, been undermined by male clergy in my place of work in front of parishioners. When I worked as a curate with children and youth, there was an anonymous survey done in the parish, which was the first mistake, where someone said that my ministry was bullshit. Because, well, first of all, of course, we'll put the lady curates to work with kids, because that's what lady curates do. You look like a lady, you can take care of our kids.
Yeah, I know.
I'm so grateful, like you know, if I'd been born 10 years earlier, I probably would have grown up never thinking it was possible. But there's still so much BS,
Yeah.
because now it's like, if you are seen, you have those moments where you're like, okay, so are you going to be awful to me? Or am I going to have this like awkward conversation with you? Am I going to have to see you cross the side
Right.
and not look at me? Or are you going to be like, oh, a dog standing on its hind legs, that's interesting.
Yeah, I know. What's that?
We can do it.
It's, yes. Yeah, I mean, I think we all love the vocation at its, when it's at its finest. But there's a whole lot that women just have to endure because of gender. So we're at 1:58, so I think we're close to 2 and finishing. Thank you very much for being so patient and listening. And again, thank you for having me here. Today I was delighted to receive the call from Chris and also to have a chance to see Melanie again. So thank you all very much, and it's been a delight to be here. There are some of these books at the back, if anybody's interested. They're just sitting on that table. So thank you again. Thank you, Chris. And I think we're done.
My pleasure to have you here today, and for all of you watching and listening, I just want to let you know that what Judy talked about and what she ended with about girls can do anything and we can and we will, it's very important. I'll just end with a quick story to tell you why even what seems like a little step forward can make a big change. I remember back when Barbara Harris was the first female suffragan bishop, Diocese of Massachusetts. And she used to do visitations, and she went to this one parish, and she came back again, and this little 4-year-old boy was, "Mommy, what's going on today?" And she said, "The bishop is coming," and the boy got very excited. And then after the visit, the boy tugged, "Mommy, can I be a bishop one day too?" And she said, "Well, maybe if God calls you, you might." And he said, "Really? Boys can be bishops?" Because all he experienced was Barbara doing visitation. So thank you, Judy, for all of your work, and thank all of you for what you do. And have a blessed day.